Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for your kind invitation to have me present on one of our initiatives that we've had at WSROC for a little while. I think the history of Turn Down the Heat strategy is now almost about 2 years from memory. And in that time, we've done some wonderful things in collaboration with a number of our member councils, but not only our member councils, we have a number of councils throughout the region that have also participated since. As you well appreciate, urban heat is not confined to a particular place. It really is a problem which manifests itself at the regional level and at the state level for that matter. But I think the actions that we need to undertake to deal with the urban heat issue is best applied at the regional level. Look, I know that the presentations before you now on the first page talks about Turn Down the Heat, and it has as a subtitle Strategy and Action Plan. I'm here to tell you it's not a strategy, it's not an action plan, and it's not a framework. It's actually all of those things combined into a document that tries to put forward an argument or a case as to why we should be dealing with urban heat mitigation, and then proposes a practical course of action to deal with it, mostly at the local government level, because that's the level of government that is closest to place and most easily able to get on and deal with the issue. I'm just going to the second slide now. I was going to the second slide now. Here we go. For purposes of synchronisation, right now there should be a slide titled The Issue Urban Heat, and it talks about four takeaways from this slide is that urban heat is Sydney's top shock and biggest risk, which was identified as part of the Resilient Sydney Strategy 2018. The Greater Sydney Region Plan 2018 also identified heat waves and extreme heat as issues that need to be managed. In fact, it was a Premier's priority to the Greater Sydney Commission to deal with urban heat after significant amounts of advocacy from WSROC and its member councils in this regard. The Office of Environment and Heritage in 2015 predicted that there would be an additional 5 to 10 hot days by 2030 expected for Greater Western Sydney. And hot days, I mean really hot days. We're talking about 40-degree temperatures. And the state level emergency risk assessment data 2017 identified extreme heat as one of the top hazards for New South Wales. And I think we can honestly say that no one's going to argue about those 4 points that have been made right now. Extreme heat and heat wave events are a significant risk and shock to modern cities around the world, and in particular in Greater Western Sydney. I've gone to the next slide now. The slide talks about issues such as mortality and morbidity during heat waves. It talks about the impacts on productivity, talks about impacts on infrastructure, talks about impacts on energy usage during extreme heat events and during heat waves. The issue is pretty clear, as I said. I don't think we need to do a whole lot more research in this. We do now know that there is a need to build better places and to better prepare our communities for urban heat. Next slide. So the question is, why did Western Sydney see this as a major issue? Because it was the councils of Greater Western Sydney that came together to take this on board as an issue of regional significance. If you have a look at that graph, the thing that strikes me about that graph is on the right-hand side, the extreme fluctuations, the red on the right-hand side of that graph shows the temperatures over time from 2000, or probably from 1997 to 2017, around Penrith. Especially around the Penrith Lakes area. And you can see that relative to the around Parramatta, say, which is a central city, and the Harbour CBD, it is significantly higher. We suffer from extreme heat in Western Sydney far more than anywhere else in New South Wales, or I should say in Sydney. And that's because of the geography of the place. It's because of the amount of development which is taking place as well. And of course there are some climatic things I don't understand, that the people from Bureau of Meteorology and some of the universities tell me there are some things in Western Sydney in terms of the landscape that makes the problem worse than it otherwise would be. The next slide, again, why Western Sydney? We've just mapped on that picture people that's socially disadvantaged, and those groups of social disadvantage, whether it be economic, health, social and otherwise, and how they're mapped relative to heat. And the dark red areas are those areas that have high numbers of disadvantaged communities that are exposed to extreme heat. And if you have a look at it compared to the rest of Sydney, you can see that most of the concentrations are in Greater Western Sydney. Here's a slide that I think it's a favourite slide, because when you want to make a point about where development is heading now and some of the problems of modern cities, this is an area that we quite often refer to. On the left-hand side is a place called Marsden Park. In 2010, you will see that there's a lot of greenery, a lot of open space. In fact, if you took a picture of that area just a few years before, it would have shown a whole lot more tree canopy cover. A lot of it was actually removed, ready for development. And on the right-hand side, in 2019, you see what's happened. And you don't have to be an Einstein to work out what's actually occurred there and some of the problems that are occurring that we need to deal with. Next slide. So, at the moment, it would be fair to say that our current approaches to dealing with heat are based on internal environments. You know, we have the basics, Energy Star ratings, we have air conditioning, and we have heatwave response plans, but it's all about how do we make buildings more habitable and how we help people within buildings have a more livable experience, you know, more greater degrees of comfort. We don't spend a whole lot of time outside of those environments, you know, in the public domain, in our parklands, on our footpaths, on our roads, in buildings, infrastructure that are outside our living and working environments. So there has been a focus on what we call the external environments. Next slide. Given all that, and given what we know about urban heat in major cities today, so how do you deal with this? And I think it would be fair to say that one of the sexy words of 2018, actually I think it was started in 2016, 17, 18, is the word collaboration. And it means different things to different people, but the reality is that one level of government or one stakeholder group, whether it be industry or local government or communities, or the federal government for that matter, don't have the solutions to the problem. So collaboration is required not only across multiple levels of government, but also across multiple stakeholder groups, across industry, across communities and the like. So to turn down the heat strategy was really born out of a collaboration of a whole bunch of stakeholders. And it came out, well, what the result was, of course, is this blue document, predominantly a blue document that looks like that. And the document has been well received. It is constantly being pointed to as a relatively rigorous and comprehensive approach to the problem of urban heat. Next slide. You would all know that trying to get diverse stakeholders into a room to talk about a particular issue that impacts different stakeholder groups to different degrees is a problem in itself. I'm just, to be quite honest, I'm still amazed that we were able to do this. And this came about because of the commitment and engagement of our member councils. And in that slide that's before you right now, you see that there's a steering committee made up of WSROC, Resilience Sydney, New South Wales Health, the Office of the Government Architect, the Office of Environment and Heritage, Western Sydney University, the Greater Sydney Commission on Planning and Environment. Then we have a council working group, so as you can see there. And then on the right-hand side of that slide are all the major stakeholders that have actually contributed to the strategy. So that is a significant number of very diverse organisations that have contributed to the strategy. And essentially, it is the reason why the strategy has been as successful as it has today. Next slide. Target, strategic drivers and actions. You know, what's a strategy or a framework or an action plan without having some targets and being aware of what the strategic drivers are and what are the specific actions that will produce the outcomes that we desire by our communities. You can cut, slice and dice the problem many different ways. If you have a look at some targets that we've set, now I know that they are ambitious and they are provisional, but these targets were set by the steering committee by having the domain experts in the room at the time we set these targets saying, are these things achievable? Are they doable? I'm assured by the subject matter experts at a very senior level that these are. They are provisional and we need to do a little bit more, We need to apply a little bit more rigour around these to see whether they are achievable and what level of resource will be required to try and produce these sorts of outcomes. So we need to increase multi-sectoral collaboration investment, it's a given. But here are the things that tends to drive opinion one way or the other. We've actually said that we believe that we can actually reduce ambient temperatures in Western Sydney by about 1.5 degrees Celsius through a combination of different strategies. We believe that by 2023 we could mitigate urban heat to the point where you get a zero net increase in economic impact. So it doesn't impact our economy in Western Sydney and our productivity. And the last one, which is a health target, is that we should not see any increase in morbidity or mortality of heat waves in Western Sydney by 2023. Now, they've been set by different people. There's been a significant amount of rigour applied by the research organisations that support the strategy, as well as those who are leading in those particular domains at the state government level. Now, our strategic drivers for achieving these targets are: we need to take action together. No single level of government, no single stakeholder group can actually do this on their own. Design and plan to cool the built environment. This is outside of offices and homes and facilities. We need to have a look at our parks, our roads, the public domain in general, and making sure that the buildings we put in place are appropriate. We need to green our urban areas, more greenery. We need to build a community that is healthy and prepared through various mechanisms, and we need some innovative and responsive infrastructure. We have identified 16 actions under those strategic drivers for implementation. Next slide. I'll go through this very, very quickly. Urban cooling strategy. The Premier's made lots of announcements about trees. Everyone in Sydney is running around talking about trees, tree canopy cover, where do we plant them, what sort of trees, how much it's going to cost. Trees alone will not do the job that we need to do. There are a number of things that we can use. We can use greenery, we can use water, we can have a combination of greenery and water, and we can use cool materials. And if you have a look at that, the picture on that slide before you now, on the right-hand side, you can see that the reference, there's a particular part of Western Sydney there, shows the temperature differential across different parts of Sydney. And then as you go across there, you can see what it does when you apply greenery, when you apply water, then a combination of greenery and water, cool materials, and then cool material and water and combine. And you can see that we get a 29 to 43% decrease in the ambient temperatures when you apply all of those strategies together. That's significant, and that came about from some work by the University of New South Wales. Very, very quickly, on a slide that shows homes and Marsden Park, I think it is. It talks about, is that at Marsden Park? Is it somewhere? Where is it?
The ponds.
Oh, the ponds! Sorry, I apologise to Kerry. Kerry, if you're listening in. You can see that cool roofs are a factor. The use of eaves on buildings, the use and colour material of facades, the amount of insulation and where it's placed, pavers and road surfaces. Then in the greening area, you can see the verges of our built-up environments, the backyards and the open space. How much greenery do we put there? Where do we place it? How do we maintain it? And then the use of water. Permeable surfaces, do we need them? Can we make them less permeable? Sorry, it's opposite, more permeable, isn't it? I'm Italian, some of these words confuse me. Use of swales and retention basins and the like, and also the use of natural and artificial water bodies. If I might digress, ancient Rome had an issue with heat. It was a city not near the ocean, and it used an extensive network of fountains and watercourses to actually cool the city. We can actually take some lessons from ancient Rome, and that is not because I was born in Rome. I'm not a proponent of the way that Rome used to do things, but it's interesting to see that as you move around Rome, just the sheer number of water fountains where people can actually get fresh, clean drinking water spread throughout the city. The next slide is connecting research with our practitioners. You can see the University of New South Wales, Western Sydney University has done a lot of work on our behalf. Next, community engagement. I think, generally speaking, community is not aware of the extreme risk posed by heat waves and extreme heat events. Sure, they feel uncomfortable. Sure, they go looking for cool environments. But as a community, I'm not too sure whether they fully appreciate the health risks associated with these events. We need to better inform them. Health and emergency response. I can say that in New South Wales we do have a heatwave plan, and I think we do a reasonable job in responding. Part of the strategy is looking at that extreme heat event response capability and whether it can actually be improved. The next slide, it says actions are interrelated. Urban cooling mitigation and adaptation, and it has a different the strategic drivers I spoke about. You can see in essence that all of them are interconnected, very, very sophisticated. It is complex. One single action in one particular domain in itself will produce very little in terms of the outcomes that we need. There is a very complex web of interconnectivity across the strategic drivers that we must better accommodate in our strategies and going forward. The next slide is titled Putting Strategy into Practice, Planning Review. You can read there the different elements to what needs to be done in the planning domain. Suffice to say that up until now, as part of the strategy, what we've been able to do is work with our member councils to have model statements on urban heat prepared and inserted into local environment plans and into community strategic plans. We need to do more. Next slide, putting strategy into practice. There is one particular project called Cool Suburbs, which has already fallen out of the strategy. And essentially what it is a project to identify that criteria that we would apply to a precinct, a neighbourhood, a community, a master plan community, perhaps even a region at a regional scale. The sort of criteria that we could actually accredit how well that particular space is able to accommodate or respond to or negate the effects of urban heat. So, how what the built environment looks like. Do we have swimming pools for people? Do we use tree canopy cover? Are there refuges that people can go to during extreme heat events or during heat waves, like libraries and community centres, those sorts of things? And what we do, we work with industry, local government and state government, and what we come up with is a score for a community. So someone coming into that community knows how well that community, that precinct, that neighbourhood is actually able to accommodate the challenge of urban heat. At the moment, the scoping of the pilot is currently underway. We've received funding for a thing called Cool Suburbs. Maybe at some stage we'll see our suburbs accredited with perhaps some icicle ratings, 4 icicles for you can live here during extreme heat events because we're able to accommodate it and keep your life reasonably comfortable by a certain number of different measures. Putting strategy into practice, a research consortium. Western Sydney University is taking the lead now to actually bring together all of the, not I won't say all of it, hopefully most of the documents and most of the research which has been done in the urban heat space. Advocacy, next slide, putting strategy in action, advocacy. Advocacy is a big thing because at the end of the day we've got to convince the state and federal governments to play in this place. We've had meetings with the Premier, with the Minister for Planning, the Minister for Environment. We've had certain successes in escalating the issue of urban heat to the point where the Premier went to the Greater Sydney Commission and said, I would like you to make the mitigation of urban heat a priority in terms of how you put together the district plans and the regional plan for Sydney. But we need much more. Advocacy is about making sure that we produce absolutely the best outcomes. And if you think about it, the best outcomes will produce neighbourhoods that may be significantly different to the neighbourhoods we're planning for today. I'll finish up on the governance structure that made this happen. And it's a very typical governance structure. There's a steering committee at the highest level, which has very senior people. I represent the regional organisation of councils here in Western Sydney. We have the director for the Centre of Western Sydney from Western Sydney University on it. We have representation from the Office of Environment and Heritage, the EPA as well, the Environment Protection
Department of Planning.
Department of Planning and Environment.
Office of Environment and Heritage.
And the Office of Environment and Heritage. But I think, don't worry about those names because I think the machinery of government is being changed even as I speak, and so we'll be coming up with some new names very, very soon. We'll have an implementation group to make this happen. And then on the bottom of that slide, you'll see where the real work done, we have a mixture of council professional groups, so the professional officers of council that come together, multi-sector working groups that come together on particular issues or particular initiatives or programs. What I can finish up on and say is this. I think the the level of awareness of the urban heat problem, not only in Greater Western Sydney but for modern cities in general, and New South Wales in particular, has grown significantly over the last 18 months or so. I think we're now on a path of taking action which will produce definitive outcomes. And we've got to be careful that with these strategies, whether it's a strategy, an action plan or a framework, that we make best use of resources. The state government is best placed to provide leadership in this space, even though most of the work would be done by local government. And I think what the strategy has identified is that the boundary between state and local government on dealing with these place-based issues needs to be better managed, and we're working towards that. I suppose whether this is successful or not will be determined over the coming 2 or 3 years, which is a period of time that we've allowed ourselves to take some definitive projects out of the strategy and execute them for the betterment of our community. So I hope that was interesting. I'm sorry, I'm Italian. I like talking to people and using my hands. You probably seen me do that a little bit. I prefer an audience, but I hope this came across reasonably well, and it was informative. Thanks very much for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the day.